What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to continue with our previews of the divisions. We are going to be looking at the AFC South today, looking at the players for the 2025 fantasy football season that you want to have on your rosters, guys that are some sleepers, and some potential busts in this division. So I will go through each team alphabetically. We will talk quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and then touch on defense and kicker a little bit as well, just as we've done in our previous videos on the AFC North and the AFC East. We will continue to do this with each division, and then I will start doing my rankings for each positions. We will start with the quarterbacks, which will be coming up on Saturday. So if you're interested in more content like this, please subscribe to my channel for fantasy football, as well as other content that you can check out in the description below. So for this video, we'll be looking at the AFC South, but first I want to touch on the Justin Fields injury from the other day. It sounds like it's not too serious despite the fact that he was carted off the field. I already did the AFC East, so if Fields were to miss any significant time, then this obviously is a big negative factor on all the Jets offensive players, as the backup is Tyrod Taylor. So just a situation to monitor throughout camp, what happens with Justin Fields, because there's a lot of things that it could be. It could be a turf toe, which can take a couple weeks to recover from. It could be a Liz Frank injury, which is generally a season-ending type of injury. I don't think that, based on the nature of the way they described it, that that's likely. But just to keep in mind, there are a lot of different things that can happen with a foot injury, and this could change the Jets significantly if Fields is going to be out for an extended period of time. Unless they were to make a trade, but let's just working with what they have right now, it could be a big concern. So quarterbacks I will touch on a little bit on my rankings. I'll go through both how I like them and then the ADP at their position where you can find good value. And one of the quarterbacks that I really like that you can get good value on when we start with the Houston Texans is CJ Stroud. So CJ Stroud last year did not have a good fantasy football season. He didn't follow up his highly successful rookie season very well. And as a result, based on how he ranked this season, he was not very effective. I'm just going to pull up his rankings real quick. He was the number 18 quarterback on the season last year, which if you're just in a typical 10 to 12 team league, then he should have been on the bench or waivers technically based on how his ranking was. And he was not, he was drafted much higher than that. So the good thing is that CJ Stroud is going late this year. In Sleeper, he is generally going in the 13th round among quarterbacks and is generally being drafted as a backup. And if CJ Stroud, an argument can be made that this past season was a sophomore slump for him. They've got the new offensive coordinator in for this system. Maybe they could figure out a way to better use CJ Stroud and to find a way to make this offense more creative and more effective. And as a result, he's got the talent. He's got a solid infrastructure around him with D'Amico Ryans and that staff, Nico Collins. There's an argument to be made that he can really place much higher than this. So if you're looking at a backup quarterback that you can draft, or if you're trying to play the stream game late, CJ Stroud is really a great option that I would look at, and especially for these two quarterback leagues where Superflex leagues where you're trying to draft one quarterback high, like a Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, as we talked about in the last video, guys that are elite number one quarterbacks. This is a great second quarterback option that I think could really give you top 10 upside in CJ Stroud. So this is a guy that I really like that you can get late among the quarterback position in fantasy football drafts right now. In terms of other quarterbacks in this team, they got Davis Mills coming back again. Not really much else to talk about there. And then for the running back position, so they have brought in Nick Chubb as the biggest change. They also drafted Woody Marks to the running back room. So they've kind of shaken things up a little bit. Dameon Pierce, who has been around on the Texans for a couple years now, this likely kind of spells the end of his tenure in Houston, I believe. There's a chance he may not make this roster. Woody Marks, a 4th-round pick. Nick Chubb, the pedigree coming from Cleveland. Pierce is going to have his work cut out for him to stay on the Texans. But I think all of these moves with the backup running backs doesn't really change my projection of Joe Mixon. I think that he is still highly locked in as a top running back on this team. I think that he just gives you a lot of upside, and he gives you a lot of. He may not get the number of carries he got in 2024, but still, Joe Mixon is one of the better running back options that you can get in drafts. And generally, he is available at a pretty good range as well. He's in the 5th round, which if you're looking at a good second running back to grab after you get a couple wide receivers and you're looking for that second running back, Joe Mixon is a very good addition to have. This offense, aside from Joe Mixon and Nico Collins, doesn't really have a whole lot of proven pass-catching options. So I think Mixon could be heavily involved given this Texans system. Nick Chubb is also not much of a receiving threat. So I think especially if the new offensive coordinator can get Joe Mixon involved in the passing game as a secondary option for CJ Stroud after Nico Collins, this could really be an excellent fantasy football season once again for the former Bengal. Nick Chubb, he is going in late rounds as a handcuff to him, and I like him in that role where you can get him as a handcuff for Joe Mixon if you happen to have him. Otherwise, I would not be trying to rely on Nick Chubb to potentially take carries away from Joe Mixon and become a reliable fantasy asset. It's really only in the event of injuries to Mixon, which he did miss a fair amount of time last year due to injury and still plays pretty well, which is another argument for drafting him. Wide receivers. Nico Collins, to me, is a great wide receiver option that you can get late in the 1st round, and I think this could really be an excellent season for him. Nico Collins, despite the injuries last season and despite the offensive difficulties, he was still the wide receiver 20 on the season. And Nico Collins, especially now that, Stephon Diggs is not on the team anymore, Tank Dell is out for the season. Behind that, they have Christian Kirk, who is not somebody that I really trust at all. And then they have 2 rookies coming in, Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, who are both guys that are unproven. I think that this sets up a situation where Nico Collins could be getting a large volume of the pass-catching share from CJ Stroud, get a lot of targets. And I think that this could really be great value for you in the late 1st and early 2nd where Nico Collins is going. So this is one of the guys that I will be targeting as well on that 1-2 turn to get Nico Collins, especially if I'm looking for a good wide receiver there. Christian Kirk, as I mentioned earlier, his ADP is not really very high. There are people that are drafting him late in some rounds, probably in deeper leagues. But even if he does go undrafted, I don't really love Christian Kirk as a great pass-catching option on this team. I would rather take a chance on these 2 rookies. Jaden Higgins is another large-bodied receiver who's more of a possession wide receiver. Jalen Noel, though, is more of a slot guy. And considering that Tank Dell, there's a lot of news articles coming out in the last few days. They don't know if he's going to play in 2025. Jalen Noel could be the guy that could fill that role from Tank Dell and I think could be an effective player. Because of that, I kind of see that he might have a little bit better of a role in fantasy relative to Jaden Higgins. But I'm curious to see how they both look in preseason and who is getting more targets and snaps in this offense. Because both these guys have a great opportunity to step up as the second wide receiver and really give you great value among wide receivers. And Higgins is going in the 13th round. Jalen Noel is generally not getting drafted. So keep that in mind. Those are good receiver targets to look at late that could really be great sleepers. And then they're bringing back some other guys like John Mechie, who's been around for a little bit, and then Justin Watson, who's brought over for the Chiefs. I don't really expect either of them to be very consistent contributors. Dalton Schultz is the tight end. He is a potential target to look at among undrafted tight ends. Again, an argument he can be in the mix for that 2nd or 3rd pass-catching option. I would try to look elsewhere personally, but it's not a bad consideration as a week-to-week stream. This defense, to me, I think has a lot of potential as the young guys like Will Anderson, Derek Stingley, etc., have gained more experience, I think this could be a good defense, especially considering the other teams in the division, like rookie quarterback Cam Ward, Jacksonville, which they've got to prove that they can be a competent offense, and then the Indianapolis Colts with Anthony Richardson. That all sets up to be a very good defense just based on the fact they're playing those teams twice. And then Kaimi Fairbairn is one of the better kicker options that you can get. I'm just curious real quick on Sleeper where he's generally going. He's generally being taken as the 7th kicker off the board. And that's pretty solid for Kaimi Fairbairn. Has a little inconsistency sometimes, but still a great kicking option. And probably one of the better kickers that you can have. Next, we will move to the Indianapolis Colts. And Anthony Richardson is another very interesting quarterback case to look at. He, again, is somebody that did not perform well last season, and his ADP has really slipped this season. In fact, in most sleeper leagues, he's not even getting drafted anymore. And again, a ton of upside there as that, backup quarterback or, second or third quarterback in your super flex leagues, because Anthony Richardson, when he is in a situation where he can run the ball effectively, it can really give you a great fantasy stat line. The issue, though, is the consistency, and he demonstrated a lot of times last year where when he is not able to run the ball, he can really tank your score for that week. He also has dealt with injuries throughout his short career so far. So there's a lot of question marks around Anthony Richardson, and it makes sense why he is generally undrafted in 10-team leagues now. This, again, has great sleeper value. I would prefer CJ Stroud because he's actually proven it for a full season in his rookie season that he can be an effective fantasy player. But Anthony Richardson, if you're looking at a guy that you can get for very cheap, he does give you high reward potential. Daniel Jones is here as well, brought over from, I guess, technically the Vikings, but mostly his career has been on the Giants. Not interested in him unless anything shows that Anthony Richardson has lost the job. And then Riley Leonard, if you're in those deep dynasty leagues, it's something to consider as if these other two guys can't figure it out, which is a possibility for sure. Jonathan Taylor among the running backs. I do feel that this team is going to continue to integrate him in the offense, and he will be very effective. Because of injuries and because of team consistency, he is falling a little bit later. He's generally going in the 3rd round. And there are other guys around his range like Chase Brown that I would prefer to have over Jonathan Taylor. Kyron Williams, probably the same thing. I would probably prefer both of them over Jonathan Taylor. But he's still a very good running back that you can get for late value as that 3rd round running back that could either be your RB1 or RB2. I think that would be a pretty good value given his ADP. I wouldn't really want to take him any higher than 3rd round, though. And then backups. So a lot of meh behind him. You have Khalil Herbert, who's bounced around with the Bears and the Bengals. Tyler Goodson has been here for a bit. DJ Giddens is the rookie to potentially look at as the handcuff to Jonathan Taylor, who I believe is a 5th round pick coming from Kansas State. So this is something to consider. Yes, he is a 5th round pick. So something to consider if you are in those deep leagues and you need a backup to Jonathan Taylor as his handcuff. I would prefer to go with the upside of Giddens. The wide receiver options on this team are very interesting. So you have a couple guys on this team that have shown different levels of promise with different quarterbacks. The most consistent wide receiver that you can probably get on this team is Josh Downs. For some reason, I had Tank Dell stuck in my head. I think it was because I was looking at the Houston screen. Josh Downs has good value as a PPR receiver. He was a little more effective with Flacco relative to Anthony Richardson. But I think if you're looking at consistency of guys, and all of the Colts wide receivers are generally going pretty late. Both Michael Pittman and Josh Downs have 12th round ADP. You also have Alec Pierce in the mix as well. And Pierce actually did pretty well in fantasy last year, but he had extremely up and down performances. Their overall ranks on the season in terms of how they did were as follows. Sorry, just one sec here. So Alec Pierce was actually the highest ranked receiver on this team, but a lot of them was high volatile games where he either scored long bomb touchdowns or did absolutely nothing. He was the 35th receiver, Josh Downs the 38th. Josh Downs was the most consistent for the games that he played and had competent quarterback play, but both of those were big question marks. And then Michael Pittman, again, dealt with some injuries, but 46. So I think in the 12th round, I would prefer to take Josh Downs, but Michael Pittman also does have intrigue. Alec Pierce, not really. That's to me more of just a DFS play if you use Alec Pierce. And then a name to monitor as well is Adonai Mitchell. So this guy has a lot of potential as a second-year wide receiver coming up for this upcoming season. The Colts don't really have a true elite one. I could see a world where Adonai Mitchell actually does step into a role on this team and can take a wide receiver 2 or 3 role and become a regular fantasy player. He's going undrafted too, and especially in deep leagues could be very good deep value if he does find a role. There's also a world where he's the 4th wide receiver or even 5th, which definitely does not set him up for success in fantasy this season. Now we'll move to the tight end position, and here we get Tyler Warren. So as I just mentioned earlier, the Colts kind of don't really have an elite top-end wide receiver. Tyler Warren has potential to step up into that. He's generally been rated as the top tight end, but was drafted after Colston Loveland. But I think if you're looking at those 2 first-round rookie tight end situations, I would much prefer Warren's than Loveland. Loveland, I'll talk more about that in the Bears video, but there are so many mouths to feed in that offense. I really don't know what the opportunity for Colston Loveland will be. Tyler Warren, on the other hand, though, is going pretty late in drafts, but gives you the potential upside of somebody like Brock Bowers because of, 1, the ADP, and then 2, the role that needs to be filled on this offense. So Tyler Warren, if he can step in and create and fill the void and be the top receiving option for Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones, whoever it may be, excellent value there in the 10th round. So Tyler Warren is going to be one of those guys that I would really want to try to keep my eye on among the tight ends. There's potential it doesn't work out depending on the quarterback situation, but this is an elite talent that was drafted in the first round for a reason, and I think there's very much a world where he can be a top 10 tight end. Going at that ADP is pretty good value with potential upside to go even higher than that, depending on how much this team needs to rely on him. Mo Alley Cox has been around for a while. He scores touchdowns from time to time, but it's just not worth ever chasing it. This defense, to me, has some talent on it, but I'm not really looking at it unless there are streaming situations. And then a couple new kickers, Spencer Schrader and Maddox Trujillo. Not really looking at either of them. All right, Jacksonville. Couple changes on this Jacksonville team. We've got. We'll start though with the quarterback position. First of all, this team is bringing in Liam Cohen as the head coach, formerly the OC of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So this could ignite some juice into the offense, hopefully, because this offense was pretty stale with Doug Peterson. So that's a big question mark. Trevor Lawrence has got a lot of pressure under him to play well this season because he has generally not lived up to his hype. He's another guy that, much like the other quarterbacks I've talked about, his ADP has dropped drastically, and he is being undrafted now in sleeper 1 quarterback leagues. So how do I rank these quarterbacks that I just talked about on all 3 teams? I would go CJ Stroud 1. Number 2, I would go Trevor Lawrence probably, and then number 3, Anthony Richardson. If I'm just going pure upside, I would take Anthony Richardson over Trevor Lawrence, but Lawrence, I think, will give you a more consistent result from time to time. And I think probably there are going to be people that talk themselves into Anthony Richardson, so I almost think that Trevor Lawrence will be cheaper in those super flex leagues than Anthony Richardson at their relative value. Nick Mullins is the backup. John Wolford third string quarterback. Those guys, if Jacksonville has to go down to them, then they're in some serious trouble. But Nick Mullins at least can gun the ball down the field if anything were to happen to him. So the running back situation here is interesting because Travis Etienne, we all viewed him last year. He was going in the second or third round, and I actually had a pretty good projection for him last year. But now there are a lot of questions. He did not play well in 2024. They also drafted Bayshul Tutin, who is a very similar prototype of running back, fast 40 time, good in the receiving game. Tank Bigsby as well is there. He proved that he could be pretty effective in a short yardage situation. And then you look at Liam Cohen as well with Tampa Bay. They use multiple running backs. They did in that system get a lot of guys involved in the passing game. So for PPR, Etienne and Tutin have better value. I don't really know if either of them can replicate a Bucky Irving type of season that you saw last year, though. So I think in terms of both of these guys, Etienne's, just looking at where Etienne is generally getting drafted, he's generally going in the middle rounds. 10th round range is, I think, pretty good upside considering where you're taking him. I think that's, if you're just looking at somebody that you could put on your bench who could give you elite upside, then Travis Etienne would be a guy to look at. He's still very young, and hopefully Liam Cohen can replicate him in that Bucky Irving type role that he did with Tampa Bay last year. So a pretty good pickup there relative to his ADP. Tank Bigsby and Tutin are both undrafted players generally. And, well, Tank Bigsby like 13th round, but also could be undrafted, kind of on the fringe and sleeper. So both of them, to me, I like Tutin more because of the PPR upside. But I think this could very well be a running back by committee and can kind of be a mess. Wide receivers, though, there are definitely some interesting options here. I really like Brian Thomas Jr. despite the addition of Travis Hunter. BTJ to me, as a early second round, mid second round type of guy is great value. He is going generally around that 1-2 turn into the middle of the second. I think that's excellent value for him. I just wish the quarterback play was more consistent, but I think the addition of Travis Hunter will just make this offense more effective. And Hunter, there's questions of what his playing time on offense is going to be. Is he going to be somebody that's going to, step in right away, or is he going to spend more time on defense? But he's going in the 6th round. I think that's a little high to compare to where I would want to take him, but he does have elite upside. And last season with Tampa Bay, they figured out a way to make both Mike Evans and blanking on his name, Chris Godwin, very effective in that system. So Travis Hunter, elite athlete, and has a lot of potential with this team. They trade up for him for a reason. I think they're going to get him involved, and he's going to have a good fantasy season. De'Ami Brown is another underrated asset who is probably more interesting to me in the deepest of wide receiver leagues, but did pretty well with Washington. Speaking of Washington, Parker Washington also had some good games from time to time last year. More of a case of an injury fill-in where I think he could be effective. But those are some other deeper names to monitor among the wide receiver core. Brenton Strange did pretty well last season as a tight end under Doug Peterson's system. Could he do that again? I like that he's getting the starting role, and we've seen him be effective last year. Doug Peterson is notorious, though, for relying on tight ends a lot, and we'll see what this Jacksonville team wants to do. But I think Brenton Strange as an undrafted tight end is solid value. I would honestly prefer to go there than to try to chase some of the other names that I mentioned before, like a Dalton Schultz on Houston. That's defense to me, not very interested in them. And then the kicker, Cam Little, again, not really interested in him either. All right, we will close things out with Tennessee. Number 1 draft pick, Cam Ward. So a lot of changes to their offense. What is he going to look like in his first season? Well, the good thing is that, again, with fantasy, there are a lot of quarterbacks that are very productive right now, and you could really find some value late. So the theme with this AFC South division is that all of these quarterbacks you could get very late in the draft, and there's an argument to be made for all of them to have upside. The argument for Cam Ward is that, he's a number one pick. Maybe he can step it. He's an experienced guy that's been in college for a while. Argument to be made that he can step up right away like Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels did last year and be an excellent quarterback right out of the gate. The counter argument to that, though, is you look at the team around him and you wonder, well, is this something that's possible? Because he's got Calvin Ridley and he doesn't really have a lot after that. So, yeah, I could see it from both sides. I still, as I say, I think if you're going to take all these guys, I would prefer Stroud, and then Lawrence and Ward to me are right around that same tier of where I would look at. I would prefer the upside of Cam Ward personally than Trevor Lawrence, but again, I think there's a real chance Cam Ward could be very good. Trevor Lawrence, we've really got to see a lot of improvement from what we've seen in the past with him as a fantasy asset. And then Anthony Richardson, there's just a lot of question marks to me. I would just kind of prefer to go elsewhere. But very interesting. All of them do have a great argument to be made to be relevant in fantasy this year and to have a breakout season. Running back situation to me, Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears. Tony Pollard was actually pretty effective from time to time last year. This season, he is going in a middle to late round range. He's got an 8th round grade on ADP for sleeper right now. I don't really love that. He's going right around the range of Calvin Ridley, which I'll talk about him in a little bit, and I have a little bit different opinion on that than Tony Pollard. I still feel like of these running backs, I would much rather have Tajay Spears. He's kind of on the last year where he has to prove his value, but this is a guy that has a lot of potential. He just needs to be a more consistent football player, keep himself healthy, and maybe he could take control of this backfield. He fits that timeline of Cam Ward better than Tony Pollard. So I'm curious to see what Brian Callahan does and if he can get him a little bit more involved. Wide receivers. So Calvin Ridley, as I mentioned, going right around the 8th round like Tony Pollard. And I think this really has a lot of great upside. If Cam Ward can early on be a very effective quarterback and get the ball down the field, then Calvin Ridley is his number one guy. And there really is not a whole lot of competition after that. Tyler Lockett is the veteran who I think could be relevant, and really only if Cam Ward is a great if he can get the ball down the field, control the offense early on in his career, then Tyler Lockett gains value as an undrafted ADP guy. Calvin Ridley in the 8th round, though, there's a lot of potential that he can get a ton of volume. He was still getting a ton of volume from Will Levis, but with Will Levis, you don't get that consistency either. So with Calvin Ridley, 8th round, a lot of target share. This could really be a great sleeper that you can get in the middle rounds of the fantasy football drafts. The other wide receivers there, you got Alec Ayomanor, who is I want to double check what round he was drafted, but this is a guy that I think could really step up and be the potential wide receiver 3 or maybe even the wide receiver 2. 4th round pick, 6'2", 206. So he's a bigger target. Figures to kind of replace the Nick Westbrook-Akine role that this team had. You also have Treylon Burks, who I think may not even make the roster. And then Van Jefferson is another guy that's been around the league for a bit. But I think that really, if you're looking for an upside among the deepest of leagues, I would go in the direction of Alec Ayomanor. This tight end room is probably one of the most uninteresting to me in the NFL, and it's Chigakonkwo, Josh Weil, Gunnar Helm, the rookie. So I think if you're gonna, go with any of them, maybe Gunnar Helm as a guy that could go in there. But Chigakonkwo is somebody that has shown flashes from time to time, but I think there are so many better undrafted tight ends that you can get than him that I would just prefer to go elsewhere. And then Gunnar Helm, a rookie coming in, maybe there's an opportunity for him to step in and become the number one tight end. But I think that if there's going to be any rookies that have a better chance of that, it would be, Tyler Warren in the same division. But this is, if you're looking the deepest of leagues and you're looking for a late round tight end, this is an intriguing option to consider, but not one that you want to be attached to. The defense is actually this was a pretty good defense last season. The problem is that with how poor the offense was, they were put in situations where they were not successful. And they didn't really rank very high for fantasy. So the caveat to that is that, as I mentioned earlier with the Houston Texans defense, this team has got to play Anthony Richardson twice. They got to play Trevor Lawrence twice, which we'll see what that looks like next season. So because of that, there's potential that this Tennessee defense could have some great matchups that they become stream relevant. They're not draft relevant to me, but they're a team that I would really want to take a look at as potential given the week-to-week situations. And then the kicker on this team, Joey Sly, has bounced around a couple teams. Not very interested in him now as he has moved on to Tennessee. So that's all that I've got for this video. This weekend, we will look at our quarterback rankings for the fantasy football season, and then we'll kind of get back to the divisions. We'll do some mock drafts as well. So stay tuned for more of that content as we go through the 2025 fantasy football season. Getting ready for kickoff, which is not too far away. We only got a couple weeks now, so I'm excited. Hope you guys are excited too, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.